How many more lives must be trampled by a system that shields its abusers? Every day, we witness the raw, unfiltered fury of injustice. A world where those sworn to protect us become the very architects of our despair. It's time to ignite the flames of righteous anger against the twisted authority that hides behind uniforms and legal jargon, turning a blind eye to the cries of the oppressed. Can you stand by as systemic injustice robs us of our dignity? Or will you join the uprising for a future where accountability burns away corruption once and for all? Before dawn broke over Harborview, Ava Freeman awoke to the familiar hum of the city stirring in the distance. In her modest apartment on the east side, she moved with a quiet determination. Each day was a promise to herself and to the many who had suffered silently under the weight of prejudice. As an assistant district attorney known for her unwavering commitment to justice, Ava had spent years preparing for moments like these. Yet nothing could have prepared her for what was about to unfold on that chilly morning. Ava left her apartment, her mind already busy with the day's tasks, and stepped into the cool embrace of the early morning. The streets, usually full of life and hope, wore an undertone of apprehension, a reminder that not every dawn brought with it the promise of fairness. Driving through the familiar avenues of Harborview, she felt a mix of routine and unease. The city had been her battleground for reform, but its scars ran deep. It wasn't long before a police cruiser appeared in her rearview mirror. The flashing red and blue lights danced ominously across her windshield, and in that instant, a familiar dread washed over her. Ava's heart pounded with a mix of anxiety and a simmering anger. Memories of whispered warnings and painful past encounters surged to the forefront of her mind. She signaled and pulled over, her breath catching in her throat. Moments later, 2 officers stepped out of the cruiser. The taller of the two, with a rigid posture and a cold expression, introduced himself curtly as Officer Carter. His partner, Officer Daniels, moved with an air of haughty superiority that sent a shiver down Ava's spine. Their eyes, fixed on her with an unyielding scrutiny, betrayed an attitude of prejudgment, a silent declaration that she was already seen as guilty. "Good morning, officers," Ava said, her voice steady despite the tumult raging inside her. She reached for her driver's license and registration, her hands trembling ever so slightly. As she handed over the documents, the officer's dismissive glances and clipped tones felt less like a routine check and more like an interrogation rooted in bias. Each curt command and subtle sneer was a reminder of the countless times she had been reduced to a stereotype simply because of the color of her skin. Officer Carter's voice was laced with a sneer when he remarked, "It seems you were speeding, miss, even though your car hardly shows it." The statement was wrapped in sarcasm and delivered as if it were an unquestionable fact. Ava's mind raced. She knew she hadn't exceeded the speed limit. Yet, any attempt to clarify was met with a dismissive gesture from the officers, as if her questions were mere inconveniences in their carefully staged performance. Standing by her car, Ava felt a painful mix of vulnerability and simmering rage. This was not merely a traffic stop. It was a calculated display of power, a stark reminder that those meant to protect could also oppress. Memories of hushed whispers and knowing glances from strangers flooded her thoughts. Every subtle slight from past encounters melded with the present moment, deepening the wound of injustice. Her heart pounded like a drum, echoing the rhythm of countless battles fought on streets just like these. Ava's mind flashed back to long nights spent studying legal texts, preparing for the very moment when she could stand up for her rights and those of others who had been silenced. But in that moment, as the officers began to speak in curt, conspiratorial tones, her legal knowledge provided little solace against the sting of personal humiliation. Without warning, the officers decided to conduct a search of her vehicle. One of them, with a smug air, stepped toward the car, his hand reaching for the door handle as if he were invading her personal sanctuary. Ava's stomach churned. This was more than routine. It was an invasion. Every fiber of her being screamed in protest, yet she forced herself to remain composed. She knew all too well that any display of resistance, however justified, could be twisted against her. As the search began, Ava's eyes followed every movement with a mixture of disbelief and sorrow. The interior of her car, filled with personal mementos and reminders of her hard-fought journey, was now subjected to the cold, mechanical scrutiny of authority. She felt reduced to a mere subject in an act of violation, a person whose rights were being trampled without any cause. The officers' actions were methodical yet callous, as if they had rehearsed this scene countless times with other victims. Ava's thoughts raced. Each moment of this invasive search reinforced the bitter reality of systemic injustice. The officer's demeanor was a silent testament to a prejudiced system where assumptions were made before any evidence was presented. Despite her calm exterior, the deep-seated pain of countless similar encounters gnawed at her. She had always been taught to stand tall, to channel her anger into strength. But today, the injustice stung with an intensity that was hard to mask. In the quiet aftermath of the search, as the officers concluded that there was nothing of concern in her car, a heavy silence settled over the scene. The brief encounter, laden with unspoken words and raw emotions, left Ava with a cocktail of relief and profound indignation. With trembling hands, she collected her documents, her mind a whirlwind of legal arguments and personal reflections. She watched as the officers exchanged one final, dismissive glance, a silent signal that this encounter was over, yet the scars would linger. As she merged back into the flow of traffic, the early morning light now breaking fully over Harborview, Ava's thoughts churned with the gravity of what had just occurred. The incident, though brief, was a microcosm of a much larger battle, a battle against a system that too often allowed prejudice to masquerade as law enforcement. Her heart ached with the collective pain of every person who had ever been judged solely by their appearance, and yet it also burned with the fierce determination to fight back. The drive felt long, the city's streets stretching endlessly, as if reflecting the ongoing struggle for equality and respect. Every red light, every honk of a car horn, seemed to echo the persistent refrain of discrimination. A reminder that even in a city as vibrant as Harborview, shadows of bias could darken the brightest days. Yet, in the midst of that darkness, Ava clung to a stubborn hope, a belief that her experience was not in vain, that it could spark change, that every injustice met with courage could transform into a victory for many. In that defining moment, Ava vowed to document every detail of the encounter. She would gather evidence, collect witness statements, and use her legal expertise to challenge the oppressive actions of those who sought to diminish her worth. The injustice was personal, but it was also emblematic of a broader, systemic failure, a failure that she would not allow to continue unchecked. Her resolve was now steeled by the memory of the officer's condescending stares and the invasive search that stripped away not just her privacy, but a part of her dignity. Every second of that encounter fueled a fire within her, a fire that promised to transform pain into a relentless pursuit of justice. Ava's mind began to strategize, already piecing together a plan that would not only address this immediate transgression, but also shine a light on the pervasive discrimination embedded within the system. The encounter was a call to arms, a call for accountability, for transparency, and for change. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges and resistance, but the spark of that early morning injustice had ignited a determination that would not be easily extinguished. As Harborview's busy streets enveloped her once more, Ava couldn't help but feel a profound isolation amid the city's indifferent hustle. Yet, she also sensed the quiet solidarity of those who had suffered similar fates, the shared pain of being judged and mistreated simply for who they were. The glances of sympathy from a passing stranger, the brief nods of understanding, each served as a reminder that she was not alone in this struggle. By the time Ava reached her destination, a modest courthouse tucked away in one of Harborview's historic districts, the initial shock of the encounter had begun to meld with a resolute determination. The early morning's events, though deeply distressing, had galvanized her. They were a reminder of the harsh reality that many face daily, and a catalyst for the change she had long fought for in her career. With each step towards the courthouse, her resolve grew stronger. Today was not just another day. It was the beginning of a battle against a deeply entrenched system of discrimination. Ava's journey that morning was far from over. It was only the opening chapter of a larger story, a story of courage, defiance, and the unyielding quest for justice in the face of systemic bias. As she stepped into the cool, solemn interior of the courthouse, she carried with her not only the weight of her personal experience, but also the collective hope of those who had been silenced and marginalized for far too long. What would you do if you were in Ava's shoes? In the aftermath of that harrowing morning, as the courthouse doors closed behind Ava Freeman, the weight of injustice pressed on her like a physical burden. Yet, beneath that heaviness, there was a quiet determination, a resolve that the day's affront would not fade into the background of a routine life. Ava knew that this was more than a personal attack. It was an assault on the very principles of equality and dignity that she had dedicated her career to defending. Now, more than ever, every detail mattered. Every nuance of that morning demanded careful scrutiny. After stepping out of the courthouse, Ava retreated to a small, inconspicuous cafe on the outskirts of Harborview. The place was modest. Its wooden floors creaked softly underfoot, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with a hint of nostalgia. Here, in the subdued light of early afternoon, Ava spread out her notes on a small table, her laptop open and ready to capture every thought. The encounter with Officers Carter and Daniels replayed relentlessly in her mind. She could still see the cold, dismissive expressions, hear the clipped, patronizing tones that had made her skin crawl. Determined to turn this painful experience into a stepping stone for justice, she began her work, gathering evidence, piecing together the narrative, and planning her next moves. Ava's first step was to review every scrap of evidence from the incident. In her car, amidst the chaos of a brief but invasive search, she had managed to record a short voice memo on her phone describing the events as they unfolded. Although simple, the memo captured her genuine emotions, a mix of shock, indignation, and a quiet resolve to fight back. With her legal expertise as a guiding light, Ava transcribed the memo meticulously, highlighting each detail that could later challenge the biased narrative that had been forced upon her. Next, she reached out to the bystander who had recorded the encounter. Through a brief and tense phone call, Ava arranged to meet Jordan Reyes, a local journalist known for his coverage of social justice issues and a reputation for integrity. Jordan, who had captured a crucial snippet of video on his smartphone, agreed to share his footage and to help verify the timeline of events. The video, though short, was raw and unfiltered. It showed Officer Daniels aggressively patting down Ava, while Officer Carter's voice dripped with condescension. As Ava watched the video for the third time, her heart pounded with a familiar mix of anger and sorrow. Here was undeniable evidence that contradicted the official account, a silent testimony to the unwarranted intrusion into her personal space. While gathering the video evidence, Ava also began combing through her memories and the details she had recorded earlier. She noted the unusual tone in Officer Carter's voice, the dismissive gesture that followed her request for clarification, and even the subtle glances exchanged between the officers, a language of prejudice that needed to be decoded and documented. In her mind, every detail was a thread in the tapestry of injustice, and she was determined to weave them together into a compelling case. Realizing the importance of building a robust legal argument, Ava reached out to a trusted colleague at the district attorney's office, Marcus Lee, who had long been an advocate for accountability in law enforcement. Marcus, known for his analytical mind and relentless pursuit of truth, immediately recognized the potential impact of Ava's findings. He urged her to secure every piece of evidence, reminding her that in a system stacked against the marginalized, even the smallest detail could tip the balance in favor of justice. The two arranged a discreet meeting at Marcus's modest office, where they pored over the evidence with an intensity that bordered on urgency. Together, they compiled a timeline. The precise moment Ava saw the flashing lights in her rearview mirror, the exact words spoken by the officers, and the subtle cues that hinted at an underlying bias. Marcus's analytical approach complemented Ava's passionate drive, and the collaboration gave her renewed hope. He stressed the importance of reaching out to community organizations, groups that had long battled the systemic issues within law enforcement, to gain broader support and ensure that her case resonated far beyond the confines of a single traffic stop. Determined to widen the net, Ava contacted the Harborview Civil Liberties Union, a grassroots organization known for its unwavering stance on civil rights and police accountability. At a community center filled with posters advocating for justice and equality, she met with Leah Torres, the organization's director. Leah, with her warm smile and determined eyes, listened intently as Ava recounted the details of the incident. She nodded thoughtfully, noting how the encounter was emblematic of a larger, pervasive issue. Leah assured Ava that the organization would provide both legal and emotional support, and she immediately began mobilizing a network of community advocates, lawyers, and concerned citizens who had long been waiting for a case like this to challenge the status quo. In the following days, Ava dedicated herself to building an airtight case. Every moment outside of her busy schedule at the district attorney's office was spent on research, documentation, and networking. She visited the local precinct, not to confront, but to observe the environment that had allowed such abuses to occur. Ava noted the strained expressions on the officers' faces, the subtle shifts in body language whenever issues of race were discussed, and the overall atmosphere of quiet defensiveness that permeated the station. Each observation was carefully documented, forming a crucial part of her growing dossier of evidence. The emotional toll of reliving the incident weighed heavily on Ava. Every time she closed her eyes, she could see the glint of dismissiveness in Officer Carter's eyes and feel the physical discomfort of that invasive pat-down. Yet, rather than allow these memories to debilitate her, Ava channeled her emotional energy into a focused determination. She reminded herself of the countless individuals who had suffered similar indignities, and of the pressing need to hold those in power accountable. The fire of justice burned brighter with each recollection, a fire that could not be extinguished by threats or intimidation. One particularly long evening found Ava sitting alone in her apartment, surrounded by a sea of documents and notes. The only sound was the soft tapping of her keyboard as she crafted a detailed timeline of the events, cross-referencing her personal account with the video evidence and witness statements. In that quiet solitude, a profound realization took hold. This was not just her fight. It was a battle for every voice that had been silenced by systemic discrimination. The narrative was expanding. It was no longer about one woman's experience, but about the collective cry for justice echoing through the streets of Harborview. In parallel with her personal investigation, the local media began to take notice. Jordan Reyes, the journalist who had provided the initial video evidence, published a preliminary report that highlighted the stark inconsistencies between the officers' statements and the raw footage. The article, though concise, struck a chord with the public. Social media buzzed with shared stories of similar experiences, and hashtags advocating for police accountability began trending. The community's outcry added an unexpected layer of momentum to Ava's case, reinforcing her belief that truth, once revealed, could spark real change. Despite the growing support, Ava was keenly aware of the formidable challenges ahead. The legal system was often a labyrinth of red tape, where evidence could be dismissed and voices silenced under the guise of protocol. There was also the ever-present risk of retaliation, both from within the precinct and from those who benefited from maintaining the status quo. Yet, each risk only fueled her determination further. She resolved that the pursuit of justice was worth every sacrifice, every sleepless night, and every moment of personal discomfort. Marcus Lee and Leah Torres became constant presences in her journey. Together, they strategized on the best approaches to present the evidence, the right legal channels to pursue, and ways to safeguard her reputation amidst the inevitable media storm. They discussed the importance of framing the narrative not as an isolated incident, but as a systemic issue that required sweeping reforms. Their conversations, often stretching late into the night, were punctuated by moments of quiet resolve and shared understanding. The trio Ava, Marcus, and Leah formed a bond rooted in a shared commitment to truth and justice. As the days turned into weeks, the evidence grew more compelling. Ava managed to secure additional witness testimonies from community members who had experienced similar encounters. These accounts, diverse yet united by a common theme of systemic bias, painted a damning picture of a system that had long allowed such injustices to proliferate. The meticulous documentation of every detail, from the tone of the officers' voices to the subtle exchanges of glances, formed an unassailable record of the day's events. In a moment of reflective solitude, Ava sat by the window of her small office, watching the people of Harborview go about their daily lives. Despite the beauty of the city, she couldn't shake the thought that beneath its vibrant exterior lay a network of struggles and unspoken pains. It was in these quiet moments that the gravity of her mission became most apparent. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every individual who had ever been diminished by prejudice and abuse of power. Each document she reviewed, each conversation with a witness, was a step toward ensuring that their voices would no longer be ignored. With her case beginning to take shape, Ava prepared to share her findings with a broader audience. A press conference was scheduled by the Harborview Civil Liberties Union, where she would have the opportunity to speak directly about her experience and the systemic issues it revealed. The thought of standing before a crowd, of having her story dissected and debated in the public arena, filled her with both anxiety and resolve. Yet, she knew that the truth must be told, no matter the personal cost. In the days leading up to the press conference, Ava refined her narrative with the precision of a seasoned attorney. She rehearsed her statements, ensuring that every word conveyed both the factual rigor of her evidence and the emotional truth of her experience. She sought advice from mentors and colleagues, drawing on their insights to strengthen her message. The story was no longer just a record of a single encounter. It had become a clarion call for systemic reform, a plea for justice that resonated with the hopes and frustrations of an entire community. By the time the day of the press conference arrived, Ava felt a complex array of emotions. There was nervous anticipation at the thought of speaking publicly, mixed with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had built a case that could potentially expose the deep-seated biases within the system. Standing before a room filled with reporters, community leaders, and activists, she delivered her account with clarity and passion. Every detail, from the first glimpse of flashing lights to the final, dismissive glance of the officers, was presented with a measured resolve that left no room for doubt. As she concluded her statement, the room erupted in a mixture of applause and murmurs of solidarity. The narrative she had painstakingly constructed resonated deeply, not only because it was a well-documented case of injustice, but because it spoke to a universal longing for fairness and respect. The press conference marked a turning point, galvanizing public opinion and prompting local authorities to take a closer look at the practices within their ranks. How would you confront injustice in your community? The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Ava Freeman took her place at the defendant's table. The room, an austere chamber in Harborview's historic courthouse, buzzed with a mixture of anticipation and skepticism. Reporters, community activists, and concerned citizens filled the gallery, their collective eyes fixed on the unfolding drama, a drama that was far more than a mere traffic stop dispute. Today, justice and accountability were on the line. As the proceedings began, the judge, a seasoned jurist known as Judge Matthews, surveyed the courtroom with a steely gaze. His reputation for fairness was well known, yet whispers circulated that he also harbored a deep-rooted deference to law enforcement testimony. Judge Matthews banged his gavel, calling the court to order, and the prosecution's opening statement swiftly set the stage. The prosecution, represented by a well-regarded assistant district attorney, painted a picture of a routine traffic stop that had escalated due to Ava's alleged non-compliance and disrespect. Their narrative was methodically crafted, emphasizing every detail that supposedly confirmed her misbehavior. Ava's heart pounded as the prosecution recounted the events. The flashing lights, the officer's curt commands, and the disputed moments of physical interaction. Every word felt like an accusation, a portrayal that stripped her of the dignity she had fought so hard to uphold. Yet, amid the barrage of allegations, Ava's mind was clear and focused. She knew that the truth was hidden beneath layers of prejudice and misrepresentation, and today she was determined to peel back those layers. Her defense attorney, Cassandra Reed, a seasoned litigator with a reputation for taking on cases of systemic injustice, rose to deliver the opening remarks for the defense. Cassandra's voice was measured yet forceful, laced with a calm authority that belied the gravity of the situation. She reminded the court that Ava's actions were entirely in line with both legal protocol and common decency. More importantly, She noted that the very nature of the encounter bore unmistakable signs of bias. A bias that had tainted every step of the interaction with Officers Carter and Daniels. Cassandra introduced the first piece of evidence. A meticulously compiled timeline, cross-referenced with audio recordings and video snippets gathered from multiple sources. A large screen at the front of the courtroom flickered to life, displaying the raw video footage that had been recorded by a local journalist, Jordan Reyes. The video, grainy yet unambiguous, showed Officer Daniels patting down Ava in a manner that was both aggressive and unwarranted, while Officer Carter's tone dripped with condescension as he issued orders. The footage was not the polished, sanitized version that the prosecution had hoped to rely on. It was real, unedited, and brutally honest. The defense's narrative was clear. Ava Freeman, a dedicated public servant and advocate for civil rights, was not the aggressive individual portrayed by the prosecution. Instead, she was a victim of an encounter where power was misused and authority was exercised with a bias that was as blatant as it was insidious. Cassandra's words resonated in the hushed courtroom, a stark contrast to the rehearsed testimony of the officers. As the defense continued, Ava was called to the stand. The atmosphere shifted. A palpable tension filled the room as she approached the witness box. Ava's eyes met those of Judge Matthews, and in that moment, it seemed as if the courtroom held its breath. With a voice that was both calm and resolute, she began recounting her version of the events. She described, in painstaking detail, the sequence of actions that had transpired that fateful morning, the flashing lights that had signaled the beginning of an ordeal, the subtle yet unmistakable cues of disdain in the officers' demeanors, and the invasive search that had left her feeling violated. Ava's testimony was a masterclass in controlled emotion. While she acknowledged the procedural aspects of the stop, she also highlighted the contextual nuances. The dismissive tone, the unnecessary physical intrusion, and the quickness with which the officers escalated the situation without any reasonable grounds. Every word was measured, reflecting both her legal acumen and her personal pain. She spoke of her lifelong dedication to justice and her unwavering commitment to the principles of fairness, reminding everyone present that her fight was not merely for herself, but for all those who had been wronged by systemic bias. The turning point in her testimony came when she revealed a critical detail that had not been mentioned by the prosecution: her position as an assistant district attorney. The revelation was delivered with a calm yet piercing clarity. Ava explained that she had deliberately withheld her professional credentials during the encounter to avoid any conflict of interest, to allow the situation to unfold naturally. Yet, in doing so, she inadvertently became a target. Her silence was misinterpreted as resistance, her composed demeanor as defiance. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. What had been perceived as a simple case of a traffic stop was now imbued with a profound irony. Here was a woman who had dedicated her life to upholding the law, now being treated as if she were undermining it. The defense rested its case with this powerful revelation. Cassandra Reed then called upon several witnesses, community members, and fellow legal professionals, who testified to the pattern of biased behavior exhibited by the officers involved. Their accounts painted a disturbing picture. A series of incidents, each marked by a consistent disregard for fairness and a reliance on unfounded assumptions. One witness, a community activist who had long battled for police accountability, recounted how the officers in question had been subject to multiple complaints, all dismissed without due investigation. Their testimonies were interwoven with statistics and documented reports from local civil liberties organizations, lending a weight of incontrovertible evidence to the defense's argument. In a particularly moving moment, one of the witnesses described her own encounter with the officers, a situation where she, too, had felt the sting of dehumanization. Her testimony, delivered in a quiet yet impassioned tone, spoke of the emotional toll such encounters took on the community. The collective experiences of these witnesses formed a tapestry of injustice, reinforcing the idea that Ava's case was not an isolated incident but part of a broader systemic failure. As the day wore on, the courtroom became a microcosm of the larger societal struggle, a battle between an entrenched system of authority and a determined few who dared to challenge it. The prosecution attempted to discredit the video evidence, arguing that its authenticity was questionable and that it did not capture the full context of the encounter. However, Cassandra Reed countered these claims with precise legal references and expert testimony, affirming the integrity of the evidence and its vital role in reconstructing the true narrative of the event. Judge Matthews listened intently to both sides. His expression was inscrutable as he weighed the testimonies, the evidence, and the legal arguments. In a brief recess, murmurs of uncertainty swept through the gallery. The gravity of the case was evident. Not only was it about a single incident, but it also had the potential to catalyze broader reforms within the law enforcement system. The stakes were high, and every word spoken in that courtroom carried the weight of societal change. During the recess, Ava stepped out into the hushed corridors of the courthouse. The cool marble floors and the echo of distant footsteps seemed to contrast sharply with the fervor of the proceedings inside. She took a moment to collect her thoughts, her mind a whirlwind of emotions, exhaustion, determination, and an almost overwhelming sense of responsibility. Ava knew that this was more than a personal battle. It was a beacon for others who had been marginalized and silenced. The realization brought both solace and renewed resolve. Returning to the courtroom, the final phase of the hearing commenced. The prosecution offered a closing argument, a last-ditch effort to salvage their narrative. They appealed to the court's sense of order, asserting that even if mistakes were made, the integrity of the law must prevail. Their argument, however, was met with a palpable undercurrent of skepticism from both the jury and the assembled public. Cassandra Reed then delivered the defense's closing statement, summarizing the case with a blend of legal precision and impassioned rhetoric. "Today," Cassandra began, her voice resonating through the silent room, "we are not merely discussing a traffic stop gone awry. We are confronting a pattern, a systemic failure that undermines the very foundations of our justice system. Ava Freeman is not a criminal. She is a symbol of resilience, a testament to the fact that no one should be treated as less than human based solely on the color of their skin. Let this case be a turning point, a moment when we choose truth and fairness over prejudice and complacency." The words hung in the air, charged with the promise of change. In that moment, every individual in the courtroom, from the jurors to the activists, felt a stirring of hope. The case was far from over. The legal battle would continue in the days and weeks to come, but the message was clear. The scales of justice were beginning to tip in favor of truth. Judge Matthews adjourned the hearing for the day, his final words a reminder of the ongoing nature of justice. Outside the courtroom, the media swarmed, and Ava was inundated with questions from reporters, community leaders, and ordinary citizens alike. Her face, though marked by the strain of the day, bore the unmistakable expression of a woman who had stood her ground and refused to be silenced. As the courtroom drama receded into the background, Ava stepped outside into the crisp Harborview evening. The events of the day played like a montage in her mind. The glare of the flashing lights, the sterile yet oppressive atmosphere of the courtroom, and the moment of revelation when her true identity was disclosed. Each memory was a reminder of the arduous journey that lay ahead. Yet, with every step she took, Ava felt a growing strength, a determination to see that justice, however delayed or challenged, would ultimately prevail. How do you think the revelation of Ava's true identity will impact the outcome of her case? In the wake of the emotionally charged courtroom confrontation, the ripples of Ava Freeman's case began to echo far beyond the historic walls of Harborview's courthouse. The case had not only exposed the individual injustice inflicted upon Ava, but had also illuminated the deeply entrenched patterns of bias and abuse within the local law enforcement system. As news of the trial's dramatic developments spread throughout the community, the response was swift and multifaceted. A mix of public outcry, media scrutiny, and a determined push for systemic reform. In the days that followed the hearing, community leaders, legal experts, and civil rights activists convened in town halls and community centers across Harborview. The discussions were impassioned and candid. Meetings were held in the cramped backrooms of local nonprofits, where organizers, many of whom had been battling police misconduct for years, recognized that Ava's case provided the long-sought evidence of a broken system. These gatherings were not solely about assigning blame. They were a call to reimagine how accountability could be enforced and how transparency could be restored. Ava, who had long dedicated her professional life to fighting injustice, found herself thrust into a dual role, both as a legal advocate and as an emblem of resistance against systemic discrimination. The case had garnered widespread attention on social media, and hashtags calling for police accountability and justice reform were trending for days. Influential voices in the community, including local activists and former law enforcement officers disillusioned with the status quo, began to share their own stories of mistreatment and bias. These stories underscored that Ava's experience was not an isolated incident, but rather a symptom of a pervasive problem. Meanwhile, the internal workings of the Harborview Police Department came under intense scrutiny. The revelations made in the courtroom ignited an internal investigation, led by an independent oversight committee formed in response to mounting public pressure. The committee, composed of respected legal professionals, community representatives, and experts on police accountability, was tasked with examining the records of Officers Carter and Daniels. Early findings pointed to a disturbing pattern of behavior. Prior complaints, dismissed without adequate review, suggested that these officers had a long history of engaging in aggressive and biased policing practices. Ava's legal team worked relentlessly to build on the momentum generated by the public outcry. Cassandra Reed, her steadfast defense attorney, coordinated with Marcus Lee and other colleagues to sift through mountains of data. They reviewed past incidents, internal memos, and disciplinary reports, assembling a comprehensive dossier that connected Ava's case with other allegations of misconduct. The dossier was not only aimed at holding the officers accountable, but also at catalyzing policy changes within the police department, a reform that many believed was long overdue. In one particularly poignant development, an anonymous whistleblower from within the department came forward. This individual, whose identity was carefully protected, revealed that certain protocols had been deliberately manipulated to downplay incidents of misconduct. The whistleblower provided documents that illustrated a disturbing trend. When complaints against officers like Carter and Daniels surfaced, a culture of silence and cover-up prevailed. The whistleblower's testimony was a turning point, further bolstering the case against the officers and intensifying calls for reform. At the same time, the media continued to play a pivotal role in shaping public perception. Veteran journalists and emerging reporters alike dug into the history of the Harborview Police Department, unearthing long-standing issues of racial bias and mismanagement. Editorials in local newspapers and national outlets questioned how a system so steeped in tradition and authority could continue to operate without accountability. Public debate ignited in online forums, community radio shows, and televised town halls. Amid this clamor, Ava's measured stance, her refusal to let her personal trauma be exploited for political gain, earned her widespread admiration and bolstered her credibility as both a legal professional and an advocate for civil rights. For Ava, every interview, every community meeting, and every media appearance was a delicate balancing act. She had to navigate the fine line between sharing her painful experience to illuminate systemic problems and protecting herself from further personal and professional repercussions. Her colleagues in the district attorney's office expressed both concern and support. Many recognized that while Ava's case was a beacon for necessary change, it also risked exposing her to intense scrutiny from within the institution she had long served. Nonetheless, she remained resolute. In her heart, the fight was not merely about vindication for one unjust stop. It was about ensuring that the entire community would one day be treated with the dignity and fairness they deserved. As the investigation into the officers progressed, new challenges emerged. Political figures began weighing in, and the police union's influence became apparent as they lobbied to protect their members. Behind closed doors, heated discussions took place among local policymakers, law enforcement officials, and community activists. Proposals were floated to reform internal review processes, increase transparency in disciplinary actions, and establish independent oversight bodies with the authority to investigate misconduct. Though these discussions were fraught with tension, they represented a critical turning point, a recognition that meaningful change required more than just isolated legal victories. One memorable moment came during a public forum organized by the Harborview Civil Liberties Union. Ava was invited to speak before a diverse audience of citizens, activists, and even some law enforcement officers open to reform. Standing before the crowd, She recounted the details of that fateful morning with a mixture of clinical precision and raw emotion. Her words cut through the usual rhetoric of policy debates and resonated on a deeply human level. Many in the audience, including survivors of similar incidents, found a renewed sense of hope and determination. In that room, the atmosphere was electric with the promise of change, a change that could transform the very fabric of community police relations in Harborview. The investigation into the misconduct of Officers Carter and Daniels yielded significant results. The Independent Oversight Committee recommended disciplinary measures that ranged from suspension to termination, and even suggested that the case be forwarded to the District Attorney's Office for potential criminal charges. These recommendations, while controversial, were seen by many as a necessary step toward reestablishing public trust. The findings also led to calls for a broader review of police practices citywide, with advocacy groups pushing for legislative reforms at the state level. Throughout these tumultuous weeks, Ava found solace and strength in the solidarity of the community. She received countless messages from individuals who expressed gratitude for her bravery, many sharing stories of similar encounters with prejudice. In these messages, people spoke of feeling seen and heard for the first time in years. Such responses reinforced Ava's belief that while the battle against systemic injustice was far from over, every small victory was a step toward a more equitable society. Yet, the struggle was not without personal cost. The emotional toll of reliving the traumatic encounter and facing relentless public scrutiny weighed heavily on Ava. There were nights when the pressure of the case and the continuous barrage of criticism seemed overwhelming. But in those moments, she found comfort in her unwavering commitment to justice and in the support of her close friends and family. Each setback only deepened her resolve, transforming pain into a steadfast determination to see the fight through, no matter the obstacles. Back at the district attorney's office, whispers of Ava's achievements began to challenge the old paradigms. Her perseverance in the face of adversity prompted a broader internal dialogue about fairness, accountability, and the role of public servants in safeguarding civil rights. While some colleagues remained hesitant, others began to openly advocate for reforms and express their solidarity with Ava's cause. In time, this internal shift would prove crucial, as it set the stage for deeper institutional changes that could prevent future abuses of power. On a particularly reflective evening, as Ava sat in her modest apartment overlooking the twinkling lights of Harborview, she allowed herself a rare moment of introspection. The journey had been arduous, a relentless battle against forces that seemed insurmountable at times. Yet, in that quiet moment, she recognized that the seeds of change were being sown. The case was not just about her own vindication. It was about igniting a fire of transformation that could inspire future generations to challenge injustice wherever it reared its head. Her thoughts drifted to the faces of those who had stood by her, to the community meetings, the press conferences, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Every conversation, every piece of evidence, every brave testimony had contributed to an undeniable narrative of resistance and hope. The struggle to dismantle a system built on prejudice was immense, but Ava had learned that even the smallest act of courage could have far-reaching consequences. As the investigation continued and the call for reform grew louder, Ava knew that the road ahead would be long and filled with challenges. But she also knew that change was possible, that every honest effort to expose the truth added to the momentum needed to overturn a flawed system. In the face of adversity, she had transformed personal pain into a powerful catalyst for change, a change that promised to extend far beyond the confines of Harborview. What reforms do you believe are most critical to ensure accountability in law enforcement? In the weeks following the sweeping internal investigation and the explosive public hearings, Harborview began to shift. The city's pulse had been jolted by the revelations in Ava Freeman's case, a case that had rippled through the corridors of power, ignited protests on busy streets, and spurred a flurry of legislative proposals. The aftermath of the trial was as complex as it was hopeful, as the community struggled to reconcile the bitter taste of past injustices with the promise of a reformed future. Ava's days had transformed from the quiet routine of legal work into a relentless flurry of meetings, interviews, and community outreach programs. Every morning, as she prepared for another day at the district attorney's office, She felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Yet, that weight was also tempered by a newfound purpose. The case had become more than a legal battle. It was a beacon for a movement that demanded accountability, transparency, and systemic change. One brisk morning, as the first light of day spread over Harborview's skyline, Ava attended a city council meeting that had been specially convened to address police reform. The room was filled with council members, community activists, and local residents, each with their own story of struggle against discrimination. At the center of the discussion was the Independent Oversight Committee's report, a damning document that not only detailed the misconduct of Officers Carter and Daniels, but also exposed a systemic culture of impunity within the police department. During the heated debate, Ava was invited to share her personal account. Standing at the podium with a mixture of exhaustion and resolve, she spoke in measured tones about that fateful morning, the flashing lights, the intrusive search, and the silent judgment that had cut so deeply. Her words resonated with the audience. For many, her story was a mirror reflecting years of overlooked pain and hidden injustice. The council members listened intently as she outlined a series of concrete reforms: enhanced training on implicit bias, stricter disciplinary protocols, and the establishment of a truly independent oversight body with the power to enforce meaningful accountability. Her testimony was met with both applause and skeptical murmurs. Some council members, cautious about upsetting long-standing alliances with local law enforcement, questioned whether such radical changes could be implemented without destabilizing the community. But as the session continued, the mounting evidence, from detailed case files to compelling personal narratives, made it clear that change was not only necessary but inevitable. The meeting ended with a tentative resolution to draft new policies, setting in motion a process that would require months of negotiation, public input, and legal scrutiny. Outside the council chambers, the streets of Harborview were abuzz with activity. Protest marches and community forums became regular events as citizens demanded that the promises of reform be honored. Ava found herself at the heart of these events, not as a reluctant figure thrust into the spotlight, but as a leader who had earned the trust and admiration of many. In small gatherings at community centers and large rallies in public squares, she shared her experiences and listened to the stories of others who had endured similar mistreatment. Each testimony reinforced the reality that the struggle for justice was a collective one, uniting people from all walks of life under the banner of equality. Yet, the road to reform was fraught with obstacles. Behind closed doors, powerful figures within the police union and certain political circles continued to resist change. They argued that the Oversight Committee's report was biased, that the actions of a few isolated officers should not tarnish the entire institution. Lobbyists, well-versed in the art of political maneuvering, worked diligently to sow seeds of doubt and to delay the implementation of any significant changes. Rumors circulated of backroom deals and pressure tactics aimed at undermining the momentum of the movement. Ava knew that these forces, steeped in tradition and vested interests, would not relinquish power easily. Determined to counter these efforts, Ava and her legal team ramped up their strategy. Cassandra Reed coordinated with Marcus Lee and a network of civil rights attorneys to prepare for what could become a protracted legal battle. They organized workshops and seminars, educating community members about their rights and how to document incidents of abuse. They also reached out to sympathetic lawmakers and federal oversight agencies, ensuring that every level of government was aware of the mounting pressure for reform in Harborview. One evening, as the city's neon lights flickered to life, Ava attended a late-night strategy meeting at a local community center. The room was filled with activists, lawyers, and ordinary citizens united by their shared commitment to justice. At the head of the table, Ava outlined a bold new initiative, a comprehensive community monitoring program designed to record police interactions in real time. The proposal was to equip community centers and volunteer groups with high-quality recording equipment, create a centralized database for public access, and provide legal assistance to anyone who experienced discrimination. The idea was met with enthusiastic applause. It represented a proactive step toward ensuring that every encounter with law enforcement could be scrutinized and held accountable. Despite the challenges, the progress was undeniable. Media coverage of the case continued to shine a spotlight on police misconduct. National headlines and investigative reports echoed the call for reform, and soon, what began as a localized issue in Harborview became part of a broader national conversation on police accountability. Ava's calm and dignified presence in interviews and press conferences contrasted sharply with the often sensationalized portrayals of similar incidents. Her measured tone and unwavering commitment to the truth earned her respect even among some who had previously been skeptical of the reform movement. In a particularly poignant moment, Ava received a letter from a young community member, a teenager who had witnessed an incident of police harassment and had been inspired by Ava's courage. The letter, filled with heartfelt gratitude and a plea for hope, reminded Ava of the profound impact that her fight for justice had on the lives of everyday people. It was a reminder that each case, each act of defiance against injustice, was a step toward a society where every individual was treated with dignity and respect. Back at the district attorney's office, whispers of institutional change began to ripple through the ranks. Colleagues who had once been silent started to speak out, urging their superiors to take a hard look at the internal policies governing police conduct. A small but growing group within the office began advocating for a more transparent and accountable system, a system where the rule of law applied equally, regardless of one's position or background. Ava's journey had not only shaken the foundations of Harborview's legal establishment, but had also inspired a generation of public servants to re-examine their roles in upholding justice. As the months passed, a series of reforms began to take shape. New training programs on de-escalation and cultural sensitivity were implemented. The Oversight Committee's recommendations led to the dismissal of several officers with a history of misconduct, and disciplinary protocols were overhauled to ensure that complaints were investigated thoroughly and impartially. While these changes were incremental, they signified a clear break from the past, a shift toward a future where accountability was not merely a promise but a practiced reality. For Ava, the journey was far from over. Each small victory was tempered by the knowledge that entrenched systems of power would continue to resist change. The battle for justice was ongoing, and she understood that her role was to be both a warrior and a guardian, a beacon of hope in a city still grappling with the scars of its past. She continued to work tirelessly, balancing her demanding responsibilities at the district attorney's office with her newfound role as a community leader. Every public appearance, every meeting, and every conversation was an opportunity to push the conversation forward and to remind the community that the fight for justice was collective. Late one autumn night, as rain softly pattered against her office window, Ava sat alone with a cup of coffee and reflected on the tumultuous months behind her. The echoes of protests, the spirited debates in council chambers, and the countless personal stories of pain and perseverance played over in her mind. She knew that the road ahead would be challenging and that real, lasting change would require persistent effort. Yet, as she gazed out at the rain-soaked city, she felt a surge of optimism. Harborview was awakening, its people united by a common purpose and an unyielding belief in the power of justice. In that quiet moment of introspection, Ava resolved to continue her work with renewed vigor. She drafted plans for more community workshops, expanded her network of allies, and began preparing for the next phase of legal and social challenges. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The spirit of resistance had taken root, and it would not be easily extinguished. What steps do you think are most essential for sustaining long-term reform in communities affected by systemic injustice? As we close this journey, remember that every step taken towards justice is a testament to the power of love and solidarity. In a world shadowed by injustice, let our hearts remain united and our voices strong, because together, we can transform pain into compassion and despair into hope. Your courage, your resilience, and your unwavering belief in a better tomorrow inspire us all. Thank you for being part of this movement for change, for holding on to the truth, and for spreading love in even the darkest moments. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that uplift, inspire, and remind us that our shared journey toward justice is powered by hope and unity.